Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're zeroing in on one of the world's most absolutely vital, yet kind of under-the-radar food sources. It's a fish that literally sustains millions globally, but, rarely makes the front page of culinary magazines.
Over 1.3 million. That massive number is the staggering amount, in tons, of this fish produced globally. To put that into perspective, according to the 2020 State of World Fisheries and Aquaculture report, this single species accounts for 2.4% of all the fish production in the entire world. So what exactly is this hidden giant?
Meet chanos, or as it's much more commonly known, the milkfish. Now, it's actually the sole living species in the family Chanidae, which makes it an incredibly unique evolutionary survivor. But beyond its scientific pedigree, it is a highly important food and bait fish with some seriously deep cultural roots. In Sri Lanka, for instance, it is celebrated locally as Wakaya E in Sinhala and Palmeen in Tamil.
Okay, let's dive right into the anatomy here. In its adult form, the milkfish has this beautifully elongate, moderately compressed body covered in sleek silver scales. Honestly, it looks built for pure speed and efficiency in the water. But as we zoom in on its specific features, things get a little bizarre.
Now, what's really interesting is the eye. It's covered by a thick, almost translucent film called an adipose eyelid. It's basically a fatty outer corneal layer that acts almost like built-in swim goggles. It completely protects the eye as the milkfish navigates through the warm, shallow waters of its habitat. And moving down to the jawline, check this out. For a fish produced in such massive quantities, it's got a surprisingly tiny mouth. It is completely toothless. Plus, the maxilla, that's the upper jawbone, is remarkably short, not even reaching back beyond the center of the eye. It is just wild to think that this tiny toothless mouth sustains a species that ends up feeding millions of people worldwide.
At the totally opposite end of the fish, we find another major identifying feature, a large, deeply forked caudal fin, or tail fin. This structural powerhouse propels this marine giant through the water with incredible agility. It's actually a dead giveaway when you're trying to spot a milkfish in the wild.
Now, for those of you who love the precise, textbook details, here is a rapid-fire rundown of its morphological quirks. Unlike some similar-looking fish, the milkfish has absolutely no scutes, those hard, bony plates along its belly. It features exactly 4 branchiostegal rays supporting its gills. You'll also find large axillary scales tucked right at the base of the pectoral and pelvic fins, which are almost like little armored armpits. Add to that a basal sheath of scales protecting the dorsal and anal fins, plus a neat little line of thin scale flaps right on the tail base. These are the specific traits that make a milkfish, well, a milkfish.
But hey, nature loves an exception, right? While that standard, elongated shape is what you're mostly going to see, there are some pretty bizarre morphological varieties out there. Beyond the standard shape, we have the goldfish type, with its exaggerated fins, famously recorded from Iloilo in the Philippines. And then we have the much deeper-bodied shad type, recorded over in Indonesia. It's just fascinating how one species expresses itself so differently across different regions.
And speaking of regions, where do these fish actually live? Well, the milkfish is heavily concentrated in the tropical Indo-Pacific. They avoid cold currents entirely. They absolutely require warm seas, over 20 degrees Celsius. So their distribution perfectly coincides with clear, shallow coral reefs, primarily centering around places like Indonesia, the Philippines, and Kiribati.
Zooming in on the artisanal fry harvest of Sri Lanka. Let's pivot from that global macro view and move down to the hyper-local level, just to see how humans interact with this fish at the very beginning of its life.
The geography of Sri Lanka provides the absolute perfect natural nurseries for the milkfish. The Gulf of Mannar, in particular, serves as a vital breeding ground and a safe natural nursery for the baby fish, which we call fry. And the sheer density here, it is mind-boggling. To give you an idea of the scale, just one area, the Puttalam Lagoon, has an estimated potential to yield 200 million milkfish fry every single year.
But you can't just go out and collect them whenever you feel like it. The locals follow a very specific natural calendar dictated by the fish. The primary collection season kicks off in March. It ramps up to an absolute peak throughout April and May before wrapping up by the end of June. Interestingly enough, there's also a secondary, slightly less prominent peak that pops up later in the year, right around November.
So how exactly are millions of these fry collected by hand? The artisanal method used in these tidal pools relies entirely on local ingenuity.
First, the fishers locate the schooling fry, which instinctively form a compact swirling ball when they get frightened. Next, they use a highly specific tool, a piece of organdy cloth or a 1.6 millimeter nylon net strung between two wooden sticks. Third, the timing has to be perfect. They scoop the fry only during the morning hours, strictly between 8 and 11:30 a.m. Apparently, the fry have a very strict schedule. Finally, the catch is acclimatized and the fishers meticulously pick out any associated bycatch, like mullet, entirely by hand.
What I absolutely love about this is the visual contrast. Think back to that large, silver, heavily scaled adult fish we talked about at the beginning of this explainer. Now compare it to what the fishers are pulling out of these nets. The source material beautifully describes these fry as usually needle-like and translucent. They are practically invisible, fragile little slivers of life holding the potential to become absolute ocean giants.
And that brings us full circle. From tiny, translucent needles scooped up in handheld nets in the tidal pools of Sri Lanka, all the way to a massive global industry. We started with the statistic of over 1.3 million tons of milkfish produced globally. So as we look to the future of global aquaculture, the delicate balance between these local artisanal harvests and enormous global demand becomes brilliantly clear. With millions of people relying on the milkfish for food and bait, how will we sustainably manage the 1.3 million tons we so desperately need? Definitely something to think about the next time you consider the immense systems required to feed our world.